Imagine the Great Pyramids, the Sphinx, and the powerful pharaohs who ruled the land of the Nile. For centuries, we've pictured them in a certain way. But what if I told you that for a glorious period the throne of Egypt wasn't held by an Egyptian man but by a line of powerful, brilliant black queens from the Kingdom of Kush in what we now call Nubia? This isn't a myth, it's a forgotten chapter of history we're about to uncover. To understand this incredible story, we first have to travel south of Egypt, along the winding Nile River, into the heart of ancient Nubia. This was the land of Kush, a kingdom as old and as rich as Egypt itself. The Kushites weren't just neighbors, they were rivals, trading partners, and sometimes even conquerors. They had their own unique culture, their own language, and their own powerful gods. For thousands of years, the relationship between Egypt and Kush was a complex dance of war and peace, of influence and independence. The Egyptians, especially during their new kingdom, saw Nubia as a land of immense wealth. It was rich in gold, so much so that they called it the land of gold. They also sought ivory, ebony, and brave soldiers for their armies. So, they marched south and colonized parts of Nubia, imposing their culture and their rule. They built temples to their own gods on Nubian soil, but the spirit of the Kushite people was never broken. They watched, they learned, and they waited as the centuries passed. The once mighty Egyptian empire began to crumble. Internal conflicts, weak leaders, and foreign invasions left the kingdom fractured and vulnerable. Egypt, the great power of the ancient world, was in chaos. And it was in this moment of weakness that the Kushites saw their opportunity. But this wasn't just about revenge or conquest. The Kushite rulers deeply respected Egyptian culture, which they had absorbed over generations. They saw themselves as the true inheritors and protectors of the ancient traditions. They believed it was their sacred duty to reunite and restore Egypt to its former glory. So, around 747 BC, a powerful Kushite king named Pi marched north. He wasn't just a warrior, he was a master strategist and a devout follower of the god Ammon, a deity worshipped in both Kush and Egypt. Pi's campaign was swift and brilliant. He documented his conquest on a large stone slab called the Victory Stele, describing how he swept through Egypt, not just as a conqueror, but as a liberator. Restoring order and proper worship in the temples, Pi became the first pharaoh of Egypt's 25th dynasty, often called the Nubian dynasty or the dynasty of the Black Pharaohs. But the story doesn't end with the kings. In Kushite culture, women held a position of incredible power and respect. Queens, known as Candakes, often ruled alongside their husbands or even on their own. They were not just royal wives, they were spiritual leaders, military commanders, and diplomats. This tradition of powerful women was something the Kushites brought with them to Egypt. The most influential of these women were the gods' wives of Ammon. This was an ancient Egyptian title, but under the 25th dynasty, it was elevated to a position of immense authority. These were not just priestesses, they were the female counterparts to the pharaoh. The god's wife of Ammon was considered the divine consort of the chief god Ammon. She controlled the vast temple estates, commanded immense wealth, and held real political power in the southern city of Thebes, Egypt's religious capital. Pharaohs of the 25th dynasty would install their daughters or sisters into this role, ensuring their families' control over both the political and religious centers of power. These Nubian princesses, now the gods' wives of Ammon, adopted and passed down the title to their chosen successors, creating a powerful female dynasty that ran parallel to the male pharaohs. They commissioned their own statues, chapels, and monuments, leaving behind a legacy carved in stone. Think about what this means. While the pharaoh ruled from the north, a Nubian queen effectively governed the entire southern half of Egypt. Amanirenas I Shepenwipitu, and others were figures of immense stature. Their portraits show them as proud, powerful women. Depicted in the classic Egyptian style but with distinct Kushite features, they were the true inheritors of a tradition of queenship that stretched back centuries in their homeland. For nearly 100 years, these Nubian kings and queens ruled a combined empire that stretched from the heart of modern-day Sudan all the way to the Mediterranean Sea. They sparked a renaissance in Egypt, a revival of art, architecture, and religious tradition. They built and restored temples with a passion, looking back to the Old Kingdom for inspiration, creating a unique style that blended classic Egyptian forms with their own Kushite sensibilities. They saw themselves as more Egyptian than the Egyptians, restoring a greatness that had been lost. But no empire lasts forever. A new, ruthless power was rising in the east, the Assyrians. Armed with superior iron weapons and a brutal military machine, they set their sights on the riches of Egypt. The Nubian pharaohs fought back fiercely. King Taharka, one of the greatest rulers of the dynasty, battled the Assyrians for years, defending his kingdom with courage. But the Assyrian war machine was relentless. Wave after wave, the Assyrians attacked, pushing the Kushites further and further south. They sacked the great city of Thebes, the religious heart of the empire, and the seat of power for the gods' wives of Ammon. The dream of a united kingdom under Kushite rule was beginning to shatter. Finally, by around 656 BC, the last of the Nubian pharaohs were forced to retreat from Egypt, returning to their ancestral homeland in Nubia. Their rule over the land of the pharaohs had come to an end. But did they fail? Not at all. They retreated south, but their kingdom in Kush continued to thrive for another 1,000 years, creating a powerful legacy of its own, with a long line of ruling queens, the Candakes, who would even later go on to challenge the Roman Empire. And their impact on Egypt was permanent. For a century, they had held the title of pharaoh, revitalized a civilization, and placed powerful black women at the very pinnacle of Egyptian society. Their story was largely forgotten for centuries, buried under the sands of time and the biases of later historians. But today, thanks to archaeology and a new generation of scholars, we are rediscovering the truth about the 25th dynasty and the incredible Nubian queens who ruled ancient Egypt. They weren't just footnotes in history, they were the main characters, the restorers of a kingdom, and the embodiment of female power in the ancient world. Thank you so much for joining me on this incredible journey back in time. If you found this story as fascinating as I do, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so you don't miss our next exploration into the forgotten corners of history. See you next time.